From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on CAN TV. What a couple of weeks it's been in Chicago journalism, particularly print journalism. Big bombshell. We know that the gentleman who is the controlling owner of the Chicago Sun-Times went out and spent $45 million to buy a controlling interest in Tribune Publishing. Tribune Publishing, of course, is the company that owns a bunch of newspapers, including the Tribune, Los Angeles Times, Baltimore Sun. And what that meant was that Michael Farrow, this individual, suddenly had a controlling interest in both newspapers. Well, that meant a lot, but that wasn't enough. On Monday, Michael Farrow announced that he was pushing out Jack Griffin, who was the head of Tribune Publishing. Somebody knew if an old friend of his is being brought in to run Tribune Publishing. We've seen this before, we've seen it happen. And of course it means probably that there's some kind of new direction for the Chicago Tribune and all the Tribune-owned companies. We don't know whether that's true, but one would certainly speculate. And since there's the connection to the Sun-Times, all the people who talk for a living about things like this were all talking for a living and saying, it's the end of the line for the Sun-Times. Sun-Times is over. They will just subsume it into the Tribune. Maybe it'll be like a kind of a kid brother to Red Eye or something like that. And, you know, that was the conventional wisdom for a couple of hours. And then, if you listen quietly off in the west, there was dust on the horizon and you hear the hoofbeats, and on the scene arrives this guy, Bruce Sagan, who is now the chairman of a new entity called Sun-Times Holding Company, which is part of Rapport's, I think, but I don't really understand it. And we're going to find all of that out today. And Bruce Sagan holds a meeting with the staff of the Sun-Times and says, oh, don't you believe it? This is the beginning of something new for the Sun-Times. We are going to do some wonderful things together, and maybe this is the beginning of a whole new era for the Sun-Times. So the man of the week, let's say, in Chicago publishing and editorial and newspapering is Bruce Sagan, and it is a pleasure to have him sitting at the table with us today. Bruce Sagan, thank you very much. Before we get into any of this stuff about the Tribune and the Sun-Times, we need to acknowledge the fact that it's quite likely, this hasn't been independently verified, but you may be the longest serving print journalist still in the saddle in Chicago. I mean, you've been publishing this thing, the Hyde Park Herald, for 62 years. I know I don't need to remind you, you probably know that already.
It's actually 63.
63. So, I mean, your list of things that you've done is remarkable, but I gotta tell you, when I was reading up on these things, two things struck me in particular, and I really want you to talk about them. One is that you have had a fascination with the technology of media. I mean, tell me that story about you and facsimiles. You were messing around with fax machines in like the 70s or something.
Yes. We have been deeply involved in the mechanics of publishing as well as in the editorial product, because it was important to us for our growth to be able to utilize it. And we had the happy experience of stumbling across things that were going on in the 50s and 60s that essentially changed much of journalism because of the ability to produce product in a different way.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a historic story to that. We began doing something called lithographic printing, which is really the old artist stone with paint and oil and water don't mix. And in the middle 50s, they figured out how to create high-speed presses using that technique. What was the advantage of that technique? That technique let you print from a flat plate. From Gutenberg, we've been using raised letters, right? Up in the air, it's like your rubber stamp.
Right. And then linotype comes in with the hot lead.
And the raised letters again. What happened with lithography? It's photographic. To make the plate is photographic. What does that do? It lets you set the type photographically. And so we began very early using essentially photographic techniques to create the pages rather than linotype machines.
Yeah.
The effect of that was to create a revolution.
Oh.
You know, the alternate press in town, the reader, they didn't exist in the old days because the cost of creating them was so prohibitive.
Yeah.
And this sort of made an enormous amount of sense.
I have to just, I feel like I'm intruding on you to tell a little story about myself, but in 1967, I became editor of the newspaper at my university up at Northeastern, and we had a, kind of a moribund old newspaper, and this company opened up in Elk Grove Village that was able to create lithographic products for us. And we found out about them, and we went out there, and we were able to get the university to sign a contract with them. And overnight, we went to this deal where we could do full page, like duotone covers, pictures on the front page, with swipes of color and press everywhere. It was so exciting to be alive at that time, to have, I didn't spend that much time in the linotype era, but to see that change was so dramatic, and it was just, you had this feeling that you were in the middle of something brand new, because you could pretty much kind of think up a page and then you could just do it.
Right.
And so you guys were doing that very early on.
Yes, in 1958.
That's amazing. I didn't know it went far that back.
We wrote a letter to the New York Times, and we said to the New York Times, they had been experimenting with facsimile transmissions.
That's amazing.
And we said to them, you have a way of sending us a page in facsimile. We have a way of printing that page. Is it time for a national newspaper?
Yeah.
I got back a letter from the Sulzberger Senior, who was then running, saying, no.
In a word.
But I have to tell you.
We are the New York Times. We don't need to do this.
20 years later, when they started the national edition, we started it for them.
That in itself is amazing. You also were the guy who made the Southtown Economist into the Daily Southtown.
Yes.
Yes, he says modestly.
I've had a lucky circumstance.
Yeah, you have. I guess.
Started in the old-fashioned way as a copy boy. Something you don't do today.
Right.
Gotta go get yourself a master's degree in journalism.
That's the only way in now.
That's right.
Well, you and I are people who probably couldn't get jobs at our places today. There'd been not a chance, right? No degrees in journalism.
And I was lucky. I was trained at the City News Bureau, which was the old Chicago Journalism Training Center.
Right.
And
if your mother tells her she loves
you, check it. I have had that said to me. I want you to know, by the originator of the expression.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Who was?
It was Ed Eulenberg.
Really?
Was the name of the afternoon writer. A guy by the name of Dornfeld. Dorney gets great credit for it.
But you were there.
Oh yeah. My first job, interestingly enough, was at the police station in Hyde Park. The fact that I, grew to publish the Hyde Park Herald and have been doing that for all these years was really very funny. It was the first thing I had as an assignment as a reporter. Was the police station.
And then I think you went on to be like night editor or something, right?
Yes. I had a very, very good opportunity at City News, and City News was a place that turned.
We're talking like 1951? 1951.
Yes. Yeah,
I don't get a chance to say this to many people very often, but I was only 2 at the time.
Yeah, well, it's a little strange to find me still at it at this point in time, but it's been a wonderful opportunity, and the city's been a wonderful place to do journalism.
Yeah, it has. And I just found that whole thing about you and technology interesting, because we'll circle back around to this in this conversation, but today, oh my God. So back when you were a lot younger, like, 81 or 82 or something, did you ever imagine even then that you would suddenly be the the chairman of the board of the holding company of the Chicago Sun-Times. Did that ever even occur to you?
No, but I did become involved. I am one of the people who invested in the Sun-Times after it came out of the bankruptcy, on the basis that we felt it was important to keep two voices in Chicago.
Right.
And we thought if we could do that, it was worth doing. And it's a group of Chicago businessmen, not journalists. I'm the only journalist on that group. And we just felt that it would be a shame to lose those voices, and is there a way to keep them?
Yeah.
And so the efforts were to do that, and there's still the effort to do that.
There certainly is, yeah.
And what happened recently, as I'm sure you'll want to talk about, is that someone who was leading that parade, Michael Farrow, who came into the Sun-Times situation as the leader of the investment group, learned about the newspaper business and obviously has become intrigued by it. And he's decided that he's going to go in full bore beyond what everybody thought about.
Yeah.
And that left the Sun-Times situation in a certain circumstance, and there I was.
There you are, yeah. I mean, this would be a question more for his financial advisors or maybe even his psychiatrist or something, but how it is that a guy who's interested in making money, as he clearly is, has decided that he's going to put his lot in with publishing newspapers is just completely beyond me. But we'll, like I said, we'll let him do that himself. So it's time for, I need to be schooled here. I need a lesson. I need for you to lay out mentally for me the flow chart of who all of these boards and people are, okay? We know about the Tribune. The Tribune was in trouble when it got split up, or it became apparent.
When it went into bankruptcy.
When it went into bankruptcy.
Yes.
Coming out of bankruptcy, the decision was made to split the company into two parts, although you could say that it really is one part, and they had another company that they dumped all the stuff they didn't want into, which was all the newspapers.
Correct.
And their debt.
Yes.
So they create this company called Tribune Publishing, which has all their newspapers, about $300 million in debt, and they tell them, Chicago Tribune, you're going to have to pay rent to be in the Chicago Tribune building. And the other company is the company with the gold spoon in its mouth because it's got all the TV stations.
Well, it's even worse than that.
It's even worse than that.
Well, they took all the real estate. They took anything of value, including things created by the newspaper. They took, they took Cars.com, which is a national website for, as you know, for the sale of automobiles that was created by a group of big national newspaper chains.
And I presume makes some money too, right?
It's profitable. Yeah. They kept that. With the television stations,
and WGN Radio,
right. and anything of value, including the building on Michigan Avenue, so that the Chicago Tribune is now paying rent
to be the Chicago Tribune.
Be the Chicago Tribune
in the Chicago Tribune
Tower,
right.
In Colonel McCormick's old office. Who I'm sure is rolling over.
It's just bored a tunnel.
Right.
So, yeah, we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about the Tribune because that's not your thing at this point. But okay, so they create these two companies, and then they bring this guy in, Jack Griffin, to be the chairman of this publishing company, this hapless company. And he's around for a couple of years, and I don't know, I guess it's mixed, the reviews are mixed on what he did or didn't do. But now he's gone.
Yes.
Okay, so Michael Farrow comes up with $45 million, and through a complicated series of financial stuff that, I don't understand this financial engineering at all, but he becomes the lead investor because the others back off so that he has the largest percentage or something like that. And it looked like for a minute there, for maybe a minute or two, that he was going to be just an investor. But then he turns out to be the chairman of...
He's the chairman of the
Now he's the
board.
chairman of the board,
yes.
And he decides he wants his own guy to run it, so he brings in Justin Dearborn to run it. Okay. He also is often described as the owner of the Sun-Times. I don't know if that's a fair decision.
No,
But he's the major investor.
Yeah.
Right? Major investor.
There is first of all, the Sun-Times is now in a separate corporation,
Right.
Of which I am the chairman.
Right.
We are a subsidiary.
That's the Sun-Times holding company.
Yes. We are the subsidiary of Rapports,
Right.
which was the original group formed by Faro, these other important Chicago business people.
Including you.
And including me.
So you were a founder of Rapports.
Yes.
And you were on the board of
Yes.
Rapports from the beginning.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So what does Rapports do now?
Rapports owns the Sun-Times and some other things. We have some other investments in internet things, which are still operating.
But so it's still Rapports. This is the part that I'm not.
Yeah.
So Rapports still owns the Sun-Times.
Yes.
But it doesn't operate the Sun-Times.
No.
Because of what, antitrust or something? They can't.
Yeah. People don't quite understand the circumstance in which one person owns stock in two competing companies.
Yeah.
You have to understand that that's perfectly legal. Anybody with a stock portfolio, even in their pension plan,
Right.
probably owns stock in competing companies.
Right. Two different tobacco companies.
Exactly, or two different gasoline companies, which is much more common.
Right.
What you have to recognize is that the antitrust violations are in actions. It's what you can do and what you can't do that's important. Mr. Faro has separated himself from Rapports from an administrative point of view.
He still owns.
He has shares,
his
just
yeah.
like anybody else could have shares in two competing organizations.
So
he has
then-
shares in two competing organizations.
So the lawyers say, okay, we got to create a holding company here for this.
Yeah, we have a wall between us.
And you were the guy who got selected to be the chairman of this entity.
Yes, of the
Okay.
Sun-Times entity.
Now, at the Sun-Times, you've got Jim Kirk, who is
Yep, the publisher.
and he's pretty much everything. He's
editor.
the editor and the
Yes.
publisher. Does he report to the Sun-Times holding company? Is that
Yes,
is that,
in fact, my board consists of Jim, Paul Fahm, who's the managing director, and our accounting person, and me.
Oh, so it's only like 4 or 5 of you.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's us,
But
and-
I don't want to put it quite this way, but if you decided you were unhappy with Mr. Kirk, you could initiate dismissal.
Yes.
He reports to you in the sense that
Yeah.
you are really, truly the guy who.
Yeah, but he's a profoundly good
I'm
journalist.
not suggesting
No,
anything.
but I have
yeah.
to put in the
Right.
fact that he's a guy with deep experience in Chicago, as well as in other locations. He's very smart. He knows our city.
And by all accounts, he's been doing a pretty good job running the Sun-Times,
Yes.
as far as we can tell. So now you were on the board from the beginning, and you were. How did it end up that you ended up being the president of this board? Did you volunteer?
Well, it was a combination of, hey, we have to change things
Right.
because there's got to be a wall between the Sun-Times and the Tribune.
Right. And hey,
in terms of
you're a
management.
journalist.
And I'm a journalist.
You've worked in newspapers.
Yes.
Maybe we should maybe give you this job. So, is there at this time any relationship between the Sun-Times and the Tribune, other than the Sun-Times employs the Tribune to print its paper?
Yeah, period.
Right? That's it.
Yes.
So there's no editors at the Tribune or anything
No.
who can tell you,
No.
we want you to put this in your paper because
Right.
we don't want it for ours or something like that.
And neither can Mr. Faro.
And neither can Mr. Farrar. He really cannot call you up and say, for example, I'd like you to endorse this candidate
That's
that
correct.
I have, or something like that. And also the same thing with Justin Dearborn. Obviously, you have nothing to do with Justin Dearborn.
No.
You wouldn't be meeting with him. All right, so as I mentioned in the introduction, the big speculation from the beginning was, that's it, Sun-Times is over. Farrow's just going to merge them.
Yeah,
You don't seem to, you don't subscribe to this.
Everybody's focusing on the wrong things. Okay.
As so often happens.
Yeah. The question is, what's Faro doing? And the Tribune had a terrific story in which it told exactly what he's doing. It's very interesting. It was in this past week. And essentially, Mr. Farrow has made a considerable amount of money, and professionally, he has done extraordinarily well selling information.
Good point, yeah.
Right? He just sold a medical company of information to IBM for $1 billion.
Yeah.
Okay? He comes to the newspaper industry without knowing it, but he learns. And what does he learn? And it's in the Tribune story. They're stealing our content.
Yeah.
Who's making money out of journalism these days? Google and the
Facebook
Tribe.
And yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he looks at that and says, that isn't right. And the next thing you know, he buys one of the biggest content providers in America, the Tribune Publishing Company. I mean, now I'm making judgments, right?
Right.
He recognizes a circumstance in which the economics are out of balance. The people who produce the journalism aren't getting paid. And the guys who are stealing the journalism are. And I think it's obvious. This is a guy who understands content, who has done extremely well in this new world of electronics. And he's looking at something where he sees something rather obvious.
Am I wrong about this, though? His past companies were not content generators. They were content manipulators. They were content salespeople, right? They were kind of like HuffPo, more like HuffPo than like the Tribune.
I think in this last iteration, although I'm not absolutely certain of my description, when information began to get collected in the medical field on your X-ray was right, was a piece of electronic data.
Right.
Well, recognizing that information and collecting this medical data. Okay, the devices I don't know who made the device. You could probably buy one off the shelf, right?
Yeah.
So he was a company of collecting the data. And what are we? What are newspapers?
Well, I guess I would make a distinction and say you are generating content, but you're not just generating like the data on an X-ray. You're actually sending somebody out to spend an entire day to gather information and write something. So it's way more expensive at the front end, right?
Well,
you're looking at it as dollars and cents.
I don't know what they did at Merrick, which was his company.
Yeah.
Did they have to set up the computer programs in hospitals? I mean, somebody had to do all of this. Where did his company fit in? I don't know.
Yeah.
What's important is that he said out loud to the Tribune interviewer, they're stealing our stuff.
Yeah. Now, of course, that's something that everybody from the New York Times to probably the Hyde Park Herald has been saying ever since the dawn of the internet, is that I remember going to these meetings, 10 years ago when the gurus were saying, the news wants to be free.
Yes, well, there's a whole story to that. I don't know if you know that story.
I'd be glad to hear it if you want to tell it.
Yeah, the English version of AP, Reuters, wanted to enter the American market in the 80s and 90s. They were not making it. They couldn't figure out how to get in. And they ran across this funny new company called Yahoo. And they made a deal with Yahoo. Yahoo wanted content.
I'll bet they did.
They had the content. And they traded Yahoo for stock for content.
I guess I didn't know that.
And Reuters began giving away news.
Oh, that's
on
interesting.
Yahoo.
Yeah.
Well,
Yahoo News.
Yahoo News, which was big once.
Yes, it was
right?
once.
Was once big.
Yeah.
So the effect of that was that everybody followed suit, and then everybody assumed that advertising was going to play that role.
Right.
And of course, it didn't play that role. To the content providers.
Right.
I mean, that's the strange part, that the content providers didn't get.
Yeah. I mean, this is what, You know, I could just sit back now and we could just start talking for another 6 hours about this, because this is the crux of the whole conversation of where journalism is going. I mean,
Well, but-
how does the Tribune publishing company get people to pay? They just
All right,
backed off on their firewall.
We have to go where it's going first and come backwards.
Okay.
Okay? And where it's going is that the reader will pay for his news content. That's what's going to happen. If you said when, 25 years from now, maybe sooner, the problem with that happening is that the culture thinks the news is free.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And we've only started on the road to change that. What do I mean? The New York Times has 1 million web-only subscribers. That's staggering. Remember, the New York Times in the best of years had 1.5 million circulation, right?
Yeah.
Now stop and think. They've got 2/3 or 75% of what they used to have when life was wonderful on the internet only.
Right.
Okay.
If only they could get people to, if they could sell some advertising on it.
They don't need the advertising.
Think they can do it on subscribers?
Let me tell you the other secret.
Okay.
The other secret, and we'll put aside the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
The average American daily newspaper budget, when it was in the best of times, 1980s, was 20% of the newspaper's budget. 80% was spent on manufacturing and distribution and selling.
Interesting. Yeah. Trucks and presses
And
and
80%.
infrastructure.
The journalism cost 20%.
Yeah. Yeah.
Guess what number that's very close to? The amount of money you paid at the newsstand.
Yeah.
In other words,
It's about-
if you would pay on the web $1 to some branded good newspaper site, like
yeah.
the Sun-Times
Yeah,
will be,
yeah.
if you would pay that $1 a day that you now spend on the newsstand, you would give us the best newsroom we've ever had. That's all we need is your $1. We don't even need the advertising.
So, okay, you've got me. You got me at 20%. But how likely is that to happen?
Very.
Yeah? You're
Yeah.
optimistic about
I'm
that?
very optimistic. What we need is a protocol on the web which lets you easily pay for a story I tell you should read. So you'll pay a quarter by pushing a button.
Just like buying buying music or
Right.
whatever else.
Or I tell you got to see this week's issue, and you go and you push and you buy today's paper.
Right. There've
Or-
been a bunch of people who've tried to do that, ka-ching or whatever
Yes.
it was, ka-chingle or something.
Well-
and none of them have succeeded. But I'm with you. I think that there has to
Okay.
be a way that gets.
There is already a way. It isn't being used for newspapers. Where can you go on the web, order something, and just push a button? 'Cause
Amazon.
You got it. And what does
One-click purchase.
Amazon own?
Well, everything. I think they own everything, don't
Yeah.
they?
the Washington Post.
Oh, that's right. Yes, Bezos just bought the Washington Post. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
So
You think he's going to figure that out?
somebody's going to figure it out.
Yeah.
The issue, obviously, is that you could support an editorial department from the pennies for a single story to the annual subscription at $500 without any difficulty,
Yeah.
if the reader wants you.
Well, actually, maybe the next time you come, we'll pick that conversation up there. Because, again, we could go on and on and on, because there are, for every one of these professional sites, there are 500 blog sites that are not professional, and people get their news from them too, because they just kind of copy stuff that they've read elsewhere. I don't know that you're ever going to be able to combat that.
Because people are going to buy the brands they trust.
I hope you're right about that. I really do.
Does that
I want
mean-
you so much to be right about that.
But the bloggers are going to want to get paid.
Eventually,
Yes.
eventually they are too.
Yeah,
right?
everybody's
going to
Yeah, no,
finally
the-
wake up and say, "Wait a minute, why am I doing this for free again?"
What you will have is you will have professionals in an industry who will enjoy blogging and have knowledge and don't need to be paid.
Yeah.
But for somebody who goes and reads the school budget, and
Right,
you're a person who wants to know what the Chicago
I mean,
Board of Education budget looks like,
We've been talking in the last couple of shows here about Diane Ravitch, for example, and her blog. There's an example of someone who is just in and of herself an expert. I presume she's paid. She's working gigs that pay her, but she wants to share her wisdom through her blog. But on the other hand, somebody who I mean, I don't know, something like Slate or something like that. If you're a columnist for Slate, you want to be paid because you are creating news content.
yes.
Anyway, before we go any further, what about the Reader? Are you also the chairman of the
Yes.
Reader? So may we spend a minute or two to talk about the Reader?
Yes.
Because I'm worried about them.
Yeah, we're
I mean,
worried about them too, like we're worried about the Sun-Times.
I have this image of Steve Bagheera and Ben Joravsky and Mike Miner having to put green aprons on
Yes.
and learn how to use the espresso machine. I don't want that to happen.
Well, I go all the way back to the start.
I know you
The
do.
Hyde Park Herald office was down the street from Ross' apartment. So the problem that the Reader has
By the way,
is-
I remember going to a meeting at Circle Campus in probably '68 or something to talk about creating an alternate.
Oh.
So I can almost go as far back as you can.
The Reader problem is exactly the same as all the other newspapers in the country, including the weeklies, including the Hyde Park Herald. I mean, no, everybody's got the same problem, which is that the electronics and the change in retailing together are having an impact on the economic models
Right.
of all kinds. Take the classified. Well, granted, the Reader gave a lot of it away free, but they made a lot of money from
they
the
did,
business stuff, right?
That was a great business model, actually.
Yes, well, it was everybody's business model.
Yeah.
The Daily Southtown at one point in time was the first daily newspaper to have more than 50% of its revenue out of the classified.
Is that right?
Yeah, because we had the southwest side of Chicago,
you had it to
and
yourselves.
we had it, and that was a long history. The Southtown was founded in 1918, and it was a very strong community circumstance, and it owned the classifieds in that. The Tribune hated us because they could never get into that geography, so to speak. Well, that supported 7 days a week. That problem is everybody's problem. I mean, my favorite story about this is that my granddaughter came to the University of Chicago to go to graduate school in history. And she found her apartment on Craigslist.
Yeah. That's cruel.
Yeah, that's exactly
That is
right.
really
That's
cruel.
But that's the economic model problem, and that's everywhere. It's in retailing. It's in there are all kinds of stories we could tell endlessly about that.
Bookstores, staff buying their books from Amazon or whatever it is.
But the Reader has a future if we can figure out how the economic model can be made to work.
So you and Jim Kirk had a meeting with them, didn't you?
Oh yeah, they meet with him regularly. There's an editor there, nice guy, and they're working at it.
Jake Malooly, right?
Yeah, Jake, and we're revising doing work on the staff on the sales end of it. To some extent, that got ignored, and we're reconstituting that, and we're looking at it. We intend to keep it. We intend to make it run.
Well, I couldn't imagine anybody who would be more sensitive to and more supportive of the Reader than someone like yourself, who comes out of community newspapers. And
Yes.
I mean, as you say, you remember the founding. So.
Well, I have to tell you, when they came out, I said, "This is nutty." The community newspaper was defined by geography. And whoever thought about a publication that was defined by demographics?
Yeah.
I mean, that was a revelation.
Yeah.
And we thought at first it was nuts. We were wrong.
Yeah. I have a perception, and it's not based on anything that I actually know, that it has performed the miracle of still having young people read it.
Yes.
I mean, I'm sure it's not as many as it used to be, but I mean, it amazes me when I go to these, Ben Joravsky and Mick Dumke do these things at the Hideout, and the audience there is really very young, and they know who Ben Joravsky is, which is pretty amazing. So yeah. Anyway, we're getting short on time. I'm going to skip ahead here because
Fine.
The staff meeting that you had with that Neil Steinberg wrote about.
Oh yes.
I mean, I'm sure you were tickled to read that.
Yes, indeed.
But you say that the Sun-Times is still losing some money, but it is almost debt-free. And he said, if I have my way, you said, not he, you said, if I have my way, you'll be here forever.
Right.
And do you base that on anything other than just wishing?
At the moment, basically, no. I mean, tell me what the circumstance is 10 years from now.
Yeah.
If you said to me, what do you see in the future we've discussed in the first episode we had, where I'm describing an internet circumstance where everything is on the internet and there's no print, okay, but there's a brand called the Sun-Times. And they're still writing for it. And there's a newsroom called the Sun-Times. And they're the second voice in the community, and people trust them. And there may be 10 other voices of various kinds, but there will be this voice which treats its community in a certain way that you can anticipate having, and that it's a brand that you know, and that you know what you're going to get when you go to that brand. You know what issues they're interested in, you know what they're covering, and you will go to it and you will pay for it.
See, that gets me to a very intriguing part of this conversation, because there's an attitude that the Sun-Times has had all my life in Chicago. And I fear that it has been eroded so completely that even the attitude is kind of disappearing. Do you track with what I'm saying? I mean, it is so thin physically and content-wise that it now relies almost entirely on its excellent group of investigative reporters and columnists, but there really isn't much beyond that. Some sports coverage is still good. But I mean, if you're going to talk brand, is there enough there to hang a brand on at this point?
If I said to you, this brand is going to specialize in sports, which it's very good at, and in government, and in politics, why not?
Well, in Chicago, that's pretty much all there is sports and politics.
I mean, you could say, how about culture, which clearly we're running less of than we had before? Would we like to do something else in that? Of course. It's all a matter of resources. It's all a matter of what you're good at. What I'm saying to you is that what's now in the Sun-Times is terrific. I mean, they wrote an editorial on Rauner last week, which was devastating. I don't think anybody else has done that, and said really out front what's happening down there. That's the Sun-Times.
It is intriguing to me that the Sun-Times, when I believe it was when Farrow took over, that the decision was made to drop all political editorializing. And it seemed to me like it wasn't 15 minutes after the change happened that we're suddenly seeing editorials back in the Sun-Times, as you say, a rather starkly anti-Rauner ed. And then in the last couple of days, this really, I think, devastating, and I would have to say very well-written Kim Foxx endorsement, which is something that I would not have imagined the Sun-Times doing a year ago. Now, is that because there has been a change at the top? Are we seeing changes that are already beginning to happen because of, I don't want to say you, but because of this change?
I didn't write them.
Well, I
wasn't asked to approve them.
Yeah.
They are done by the editorial staff in the best of their judgment. And I think it's a matter of the learning curve of the circumstance.
Okay, but
which is,
you know very well that there was a day when the editorial staff was ordered to write an editorial in favor of Bruce Rauner at a time when the paper was ardently not writing editorials endorsing any candidates.
Yeah.
You know that happened.
that was a learning experience for someone who suddenly discovered that doing endorsements was important for the newspaper and its position in the community.
I'll say.
We can
I think that I have said many times on this show that I think it's one of the great losses in Chicago was that editorial voice.
Yeah, well, I would tend to agree with that, and I didn't agree with the argument to start with. But the realities are that where it's at now, with everybody's approval of the people who put up money to do this, and you'll notice I'm saying everybody, they are back to endorsing state representatives and helping people with the down the ballot
ballot positions that very few people even know
understand.
About. Right.
And that's an important contribution to the community and one that's essential for our society to keep functioning as a democratic world.
So what are your assets?
What are our assets? A many-year history of an important brand, a name people know, that they either trust or hate. I'll take either.
I agree.
And that's what we've got. We have I know we've cut the staff, but we got a terrific staff left of people who understand. We are concentrating in the areas where we can contribute to the dialogue in the community.
Will you be able to build the next generation? I mean, I don't mean, I'm not insinuating that you need to push out Mark Brown or anything like that, but I mean, is the next Mark Brown working somewhere in the building?
No, we hope so.
I don't mean it quite that starkly, but you know what I'm saying. And one of the things that always suffers when a company is in stress is that the next generation just kind of doesn't matriculate through.
No, I think that, that's a general problem of the health of the industry. And we're all dealing with that problem. We're not alone.
Yeah.
You can ask the bigger organizations the same problem. What we've got is, I think, a vibrant institution. We don't have any debt. We've now slimmed ourselves down in terms of what we try to do to be able to concentrate on the Sun-Times. I mean, I'm an old community newspaper publisher. Needless to say, I had lots of second thoughts about selling off the community newspaper group from the suburbs.
And you've had a lot of experience at doing very good job with very little in the way of resources.
But the truth of the matter is that we didn't have enough resources to do all of that. We were doing everything badly. And now I think that we're concentrating on the Sun-Times, that we're doing a better job.
There is this, too often used analogy of Sears that, when you're the store that has everything and you're trying to appeal to every demographic and every part of what happens is all the other guys come along who do one thing beautifully and you're dead. So you have to have an identity, you have to know what your identity is, and you have to push it and really massage it very enthusiastically. I'm wondering if you see that there are other opportunities for things that, are there audiences that are not covered that you could cover in a more aggressive way?
Well, our problem is that you're now defining it by audience and I'm defining it by content.
Interesting.
How do you define an audience? I'm defining content. I'm saying it's clear we've picked some content issues that we know how to do and know how to do well. We don't have a bureau in London. Fine. The fact of the matter is that our national news is pretty good, because we're getting it from USA Today in a format that helps our economics.
Has that succeeded?
Oh yes, it's wonderful because they. If you said to me, "What do you prefer?" I'd prefer to go back to tearing the wire ourselves and picking stories that seem to us more germane. We don't have that. Let's face that. Why did we want that content? Because we wanted to satisfy the reader that he could read only us, if that's what he chose to do, and he would still know what was going on in the world. And I think we satisfy that.
Yeah.
Do we satisfy a reader who wants to know everything about Chicago? The answer to that is no, right? We're not covering...
No one ever did.
Exactly right.
And never will.
So what we're saying is we are specializing in these areas of sports,
Yeah.
of government, of politics. Clearly that's where our direction is, and we're good at that.
Yes, I think that's undeniable. I mean, we have sometimes people on this show all the time, and I'm always proud to have them on because they're some of the most knowledgeable people about what's going on in the city. You mentioned, that you may be one of several sources, and I'm intrigued, and I'm sure you are too, by the growth of something like the Chicago Bureau. Where you have really young people getting together, working with older people as kind of guides along the way, but they're turning out some great content.
Yeah, but they're also stealing, and they got to stop doing that.
There's that too. There's
right.
that too. Right.
Yeah, I love DNA Info. I shouldn't mention the competitors, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, what do? They sit around, wait till the Hyde Park Herald comes out, and then they write a couple of stories.
But they do at least give them credit for this. They do at least write the stories.
Yeah.
They don't just steal it. Yeah. No, I get what you're saying, but it's the interesting part about it is that people who are watching us right now are not watching us even on CAN TV because the half-hour show ended a while ago.
Yeah.
They're watching us on YouTube.
Yeah.
So we are. Chicago Newsroom is a pathetic, but nevertheless, little television station, right?
Oh,
it's our
yes.
own television station. If you have a laptop, you can be a television station, you can be a radio station, you can be a newspaper.
Yes.
So you have the weird issue of trying to rebuild this incredibly strong brand, but your competition is people sitting in the bedroom with a laptop.
Yep.
They don't need a press.
That's correct.
They don't even need the lithograph.
Right.
So I wanted to just ask you quickly about this.
Yes.
This was an interesting controversy the other day.
Yeah, sure. It's money. Come on.
What did you think? Did you like it? Did you?
No, I hated it, but I took it.
But you took it. Did they ask you before they did it?
No.
Oh, okay. Because the idea is that there
Yes,
was
of
another
course. We know what
sometimes
it is.
inside
Yeah.
it. But
Yeah.
it's a Burger King wraparound. I got
Yes.
to tell you that it. My first reaction to it was, ugh. And then I thought about it and I thought, no, it's just another ad in the paper. And
exactly
good for
right.
them. They got a 4-page wraparound. They probably made some.
wrapper, and the position was paid for.
Right.
And,
they probably made some money, so maybe they'll
Absolutely.
publish for another
Right.
week. So, that's kind of.
Paid somebody's salary.
Yeah.
Paid some journalist's salary.
Yeah. Okay. Last topic, the website.
Yes.
You were quoted, oh no, where is it? You were quoted as saying, I underwrote, I don't remember what it was. But anyway, you said, I believe you used the term, it's terrible.
Yes,
You
that's
said that.
correct.
So you acknowledge that it's terrible.
Yes.
A good friend of mine who's in public relations said something to me the other day that I wish I could directly quote, but he said, when I'm on that site, I feel like I'm on a softcore porn site. Like I'm afraid that when I leave, my computer's going to be infected with viruses. It has that look to it.
It's going.
It's going.
There will be a new site in March.
That's soon.
Yes. Won't be perfect, but it'll be good, and it will get better. And we will grow to do all of the things a site can do.
What's going to happen to this National Sun-Times?
That's somebody else's problem. It's not in my purview.
Oh.
I'm happy to report I have no responsibilities in that
So
area.
it won't.
won't
The
set
Sun-Times
us.
website will be, let's call it digital presence, will
Yeah.
be separate from that.
Well, it's separate, but it's also the site that goes, in other words, it helps their site in the fact that there is readership, and that's the site they will go to.
You're feeding them content.
Yeah, we will feed them our site.
Yeah. I just have to tell you that I have been, like so many people, obviously, very disappointed by the website, and we all have our stories of all the horrible things that it's done to us. But the thing that I never understood was the loss of early and often. I thought that was a great initiative.
I
It
agree
looked
with
really
you.
good. It really, it is exactly what you're saying. It played to the strengths of the Chicago
Yes,
Sun-Times.
exactly right.
There was video, there was audio. It was kind of an up-to-date.
Give us
kind of
time, it might come back.
thing. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to, but
Yeah.
again, like to
I
depends
understand.
on the resources.
But the thing I'm getting at, though, is that you do agree that that was a great direction to be taking Sun-Times digitally.
Yes, and to try the national thing was also a great idea. Okay, it didn't work. But that doesn't mean one shouldn't try, right?
Right.
So you said, okay, I'm going to sacrifice some of the good things at the Sun-Times Chicago circumstance to try to build a national idea that might work. Is that so terrible?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
I
that
mean-
no one can be criticized for trying things and then acknowledging that they don't work and moving on to something else.
Right.
And far be it from me to do that. But I guess I'm just. Well, I guess I'll just leave. You've actually answered my questions when you say something new is going to be coming in March. So
Yes.
I should just shut up and wait and see how
Please,
it is.
and when it comes, I hope you'll go on it and then devote a program to what's wrong with it, so we'll fix it.
So, just utterly unrelated to anything else, but going back just momentarily to the Tribune, we have a couple of minutes here. There are kind of two schools of thought about what's going to happen with Tribune publishing. One is that Farrow is going to decide that he wants to be a big national player, and he's going to spend money to acquire more papers and make Tribune publishing even bigger as a sort of a national
He's
player.
already said that.
You believe that's what he wants to do, huh?
Well, his money went into the Treasury. He didn't buy stock from another owner.
Yeah.
That cash is available. It's available to buy the Orange County newspapers in California.
So then,
And it's not a secret.
in that respect, you think he'll continue the policies that Jack Griffin was already
Yes.
sort of working toward?
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I saw something on Pointer or something where somebody was speculating that maybe the thing he would want to do is just unload those papers, dump the money into the Tribune, and try to build and sort of reconstruct the Tribune. But that wouldn't make any sense to you.
I can only go by what was in the column in the Tribune,
Yeah.
where they said, we're going to buy the Orange County,
yeah.
where they said people are taking our content and we have to do something about that.
Well, I mean, it's been so interesting to see how much the people in Los Angeles seem to hate the connection to Chicago.
Yes.
And I remember The Wire. I'm sure you saw The Wire when the Baltimore Sun, and it's like they're all complaining about those idiots in Chicago.
Yes.
And, I mean, it's just, when you own something from far away, it becomes problematic.
But it's no different than Gannett or anybody else that has figured out how to manage and make those kinds of combinations economical.
Yeah. So you got your work cut out for you.
Yes,
Are you excited about this?
yes.
I'll bet you are.
I mean, the idea of what we have to do is we have to make the Sun-Times viable in the present economic circumstance.
Yeah.
We have to figure out how it moves over the next 10 or 20 years from print
Yeah.
to the web.
Yeah.
And we have to find out how you keep second voices. Because the funny part about it is that if you think about where the web is going and that you can get paid on the web the way the New York Times is, conceivably second voices are easier to maintain than they are now in a circumstance in which the economic model is dying. And if we can figure that out
Yeah.
and survive the transition, 25 years from now, there will still be a journalism portal called the Sun-Times,
Yeah.
and it will still be turning City Hall over.
I feel my hair waving in the breeze as
Yes.
I hear this patriotic statement. I am so amazed to be in the presence of somebody who has seen journalism from, as we said before, the linotype era to whatever the hell is coming down the pike now with this, with the digital world that we're all living in. It must be an amazing feeling.
Well, it's pretty terrific to still be around seeing it.
And to still be active in it.
Yes.
I mean, and active in such an important way. So do you hang out in the newsroom? I mean, are you active at the Sun-Times? I know you
active at
have
the
a
Sun-Times.
Sun-Times phone number, so are
Yes.
you over there?
Yeah, I'm there, and I'm working on the economic problems.
Excellent, excellent.
The journalism of that institution is pretty good.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't need me. They need me to see to it that it's viable and continues.
We'll let Neil Steinberg have the last word. In his column, he said, "Where the hell have they been hiding you?"
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Bruce Sagan, very much for being with us today. I've just thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and I will just tell you right up, I wish you all the luck in the world with the Sun-Times. I love the Sun-Times.
That's what we
And
need.
I don't want to see it harmed anymore.
Right.
You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a presentation of CAN TV, and you can see us anytime you want by going to this address on YouTube, out there on the digital Wild West. And we hope we'll see you again next week, too, because we'll have another program, as we always do. Thanks very much for watching. I'm Ken Davis. See you next week. Bye-bye.